Welcome to the Birth Words Podcast, episode number 16. Today I'll be talking to my friend Lisa Cowan, who's also a doula. She had a unique cesarean birth experience, and she'll be talking about the role that the words of others played in her experience.
You're listening to the Birth Words Podcast. Utah-based birth doula and applied linguistics scholar Sarah Pixton digs into the language of pregnancy and birth to help expectant women claim their power as life-giving agents engaged in a praiseworthy work. This podcast aims to promote positive birth paradigms and is not intended as medical advice.
Welcome to today's episode of the Birth Words Podcast. Today I'm here talking with my friend Lisa Cowan, who is another doula that serves Utah, and I'm here to talk to her about her unique birth experience and the way that words have shaped her experience. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. We're going to jump into these questions, and Lisa's story is going to kind of come out as I talked to her about these questions. So my first question for you, Lisa, is what words did you use to identify yourself as an expectant mother and then as a laboring mother? And where did these words come from?
So as an expectant mother, I'd say proud, beautiful. I was very excited to be pregnant. I was proud to be pregnant. I was excited about most of the changes my body was going through.
That's awesome.
I felt beautiful and, what my body was capable of doing. And those words came from, I'm also a nurse, so I think just studying the human body, gaining an appreciation for it, and then just the feeling it gave me to know that this little person growing inside me was mine, and that I'm, one of the creators of it.
Awesome.
While laboring, I remember my daughter was born on New Year's. Well, I went into labor on New Year's Eve, and her due date, what their assigned due date was New Year's Day. And I was super excited. It was almost like, I remember asking my husband a few times, like, is this really happening? Am I faking it? Am I really actually in labor finally? And I was at home curling my hair. We decided not to go to church like we usually do on Sunday. I'd been having a lot of back labor weeks and weeks before. So I just finished curling my hair. My water broke, and within the next hour, I was in active labor. And so I guess there was just a lot of energy and excitement to practice the things that I'd learned in a birth class, reading, watching other birth stories. I was excited to kind of almost show myself what I could do. Like, I was excited about the power that my body was capable of birthing this little girl. So,
all right. I think I appreciated how you said that with your nursing background, you had even more awe for the human body and what it's capable of doing. Cause I think it's all really just fascinating and amazing. And it's hard not to just be amazed when you learn about all the crazy things that our bodies can do.
Yeah, for sure.
So thinking back to your pregnancy, birth, and then we'll go into your postpartum experience and the end of your birth experience as well. What about the words of others? Do you remember any specific things that people said to you at any point along there that was influential?
I definitely blocked out negative words during my pregnancy. I just ignored people that didn't have, positive things to say about, I wanted an unmedicated birth. My mother had all 7 of her children unmedicated. And I just had this belief that my body created this baby. I should be able to birth this baby, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I blocked out the negative things people would say, and I just accept the good things people would say. A lot of words I chose during labor to, I guess, empower me, strengthen me, keep me focused on this positive goal, that birth could be a good experience. Words like love, power. Jane is the name of my little girl, and so her name really was powerful for me because we had it picked out forever.
Mm-hmm.
We called it our love story. The word peace, choice, like those words were mine that I'd hang on to. And those words came a lot from my birth class, and then just kind of what I felt.
Mm-hmm.
Most people during labor were pretty positive. You know, they let me make my own choices. So there was a point in labor, my back labor was pretty intense.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I chose to get an epidural, and there was a point where I felt like I was a failure, and I was saying it out loud to my doula and my husband. And it very much helped that, you know, my midwife, I guess right before the epidural, my midwife kind of grabbed my face and she's like, let's talk. Let's have some positive talk here. What are you going to meet your baby soon? You know, and that kind of got me out of my negative talk during labor, and, you know, I could respond to her. Eventually, that's when I chose epidural, that it was a good choice for me. My husband would tell me, you are not a failure. My doula, Candace, would say, you listen to your body. This is good. And it was very encouraging to keep this experience positive for me, like validating the choices I made were good because that's what I felt were best. So
That's awesome. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective and how you were able to shift away from, you were kind of starting to lean towards some negative self-talk. And I'm really glad that you had other people there to pull you towards positive language, because it sounds like that made a big difference for.
Yeah, because in my mind, like, I had a very healthy pregnancy, no issues. I exercised and even ran a half marathon halfway through. So, like, the fact that I never took into account that, like, back labor would be in that. I mean, it was my first baby, so
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you can't. And birth is crazy. You can't really plan.
Never know.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it took me off guard that I was super excited and positive, and then I was kind of negative and suffering a little bit until I chose to get that epidural. So my birth, or Jane's birth, I ended up pushing for about 4 hours, and halfway through we kind of reevaluated. C-section was brought up. You know, I was doing okay, just really tired, and Jane's heart rate and everything was fine, so I decided to push 2 more hours. So the total of pushing for 4 hours. And she just couldn't get past my pelvic bone. So at that point, C-section was brought up again. We had a doctor come in and kind of evaluate. She was too low to try forceps or anything, which I didn't want anyway. So I chose C-section. And that actually turned out to be the best decision for Jane and I, because Jane was asynclitic. You know, her head was turned sideways and she was posterior. She was really wedged in there.
Yeah.
So in the process, they didn't just do a low transverse incision on my uterus. They had to cut a little bit up the uterus so that it kind of looks like an upside down T. Mm-hmm. So they call that an inverted T incision, which I didn't know what that even meant until after birth. So postpartum was difficult for me. I think the words I'd use was disheartened, powerless, defeated, robbed. Jane went to the nursery for a little bit with my husband, which that's fine. She was doing well. But I guess some of the first words that I remember spoken to me coming from the operating room, and I'm, still recovering from those drugs and recovering from being exhausted and nauseous. And they just told me, you cannot have any more vaginal births because of that inverted T we made on your uterus. And it just didn't make sense to me. And for someone to start making choices for me, just, I don't know. It was kind of hard to describe that feeling. Just a little confused, like I was planning on having all my births unmedicated, or at least vaginally, and now people are telling me I can't, like, ever again. And the birth experience was very important to me. So I not only had people tell me that right after delivery, I had them tell me again on the postpartum unit in the hospital, even a point, I think it was my 6-week postpartum visit with a midwife. She was red in the face and looked at me and said, "You cannot have a vaginal birth." And that just kind of instilled fear. It instilled, like, I can't say what I think. Like, I'm kind of afraid of her. It was just very shocking that, like, how could a healthy person go from that to all suddenly being super high risk that you can't even try for a VBAC, So that was really tough. So that was probably where, go ahead.
No, I want to hear what you were going to say. That's probably where...
That's probably where my birth trauma came from. It was not the C-section and what happened. Like, I'm proud of the birth Jane and I had. Like, I made decisions that I felt were best for us, and it was my choice. Like, nobody was making me do anything. And so that's why I think that experience was still good for us. It was people's words that really affected me for a good while after the experience.
And I'm glad you said that, because that's what I was going to ask about, is you mentioned that you felt robbed and I can't remember the other word you said, powerless?
Disheartened. Defeated, yeah.
And those words, if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying you felt like those were more because of the things that people said afterwards that took your choice away, and not because of the way that your birth experience went. Is that accurate?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense, that you talked about how important choice was throughout your labor and throughout your pregnancy and your labor and your birth. And then to feel like while you were still recovering from it, that choice had been taken away must have been really difficult.
Yeah. And I even tried to accept, like, C-section could be good. But I mean, they were telling me C-section at 36 to 37 weeks because we don't even want you to labor. And like that, I mean, that's just like to the extreme, like the worst. Like, I enjoyed laboring, at least until the back labor took over. Like, I was excited about it. And now I can't even have that, is what they're trying to tell me. And it was just really frustrating because it's the same phrases over and over again. And I feel like that conversation with the midwife could have gone very differently if, she used different words. She had a different tone. Maybe she was a little more compassionate about it. I don't think she realized how she said it, but it was still the way she said it.
It's powerful. It has big impact, and sometimes we don't realize the huge impact that our words can have. So talk to us about other conversations you've had with care providers since your birth, and how have they affected your experience and your outlook? What's been helpful and what wasn't?
So actually processing my birth over the next year and doing research on, they call these special scars, whether it's like a classical incision or this inverted T or J incisions. There's all kinds of these, and I didn't know. So I researched them, and I found a support group called Special Scars. And I started talking to people and looking up the research, and that people do have VBACs, successful VBACs. There are cases of uterine rupture, but it's rare. And so learning this helped me prepare to face a provider and to bring it up, which I was really nervous about. And it was actually at the beginning of this month that I went and met with my OB. He wasn't a resident, actually made the incision on my uterus, but this attending was there. And so I went to talk to him, and I let him know the research I've been doing. Like, I understand it. The research is actually outdated, but the stats, I guess, for uterine rupture are like 4 to 9% versus like, I think it's 1 or less than 1% for just low transverse incisions. So we just discussed this, and this was an awesome experience with him. He listened to me. He validated the feelings I had, that for me, the birth experience was very important. The words he chose and how he spoke to me was sensitive, and that he understood. Well, I guess he can't completely understand. He's helped a lot of women actually with these scars go have a trial of labor. So he does understand, a little bit about that. And we talked about the risks, and of course he had to, mention the risks. He's, responsible for my care if something were to happen. But at the end, he still said, I unequivocally, this is the words he used, 6 months postpartum and a year later, I unequivocally do not recommend it. But if you feel like this is what you want for your next birth, then I will support you. And it was just very empowering that, one, he wasn't trying to tell me what to choose. And I feel like I had somebody on my side, even if it wasn't the choice he would make, if it was his. And so it just made me feel more free. It made me feel more empowered. I felt like I could trust him. It was a really good experience.
It sounds like that one of the things that he did was validate you and your feelings and your experience. And I think it sounds like that made a huge difference for you.
It did, because I'm not currently a postpartum nurse, but I was working on a unit like that. And I just mentioned to people, the uterine scar I had, and then I wanted the VBAC, and people would say, no, you can't. No one's going to let you do that. So the fact that it's like the attending, who's a well-known attending at this hospital, tell me, like, yeah, I will support you. It was just like, thank you, because the past year, people tell me all kinds of things to try to scare me out of it when, I've done the research, and this is just what I feel is right for me.
Yeah.
I feel like a theme that's come up a lot in the research I've been doing about birth and the language we use around it is there's different positions of authority, like throughout the birth experience. Sometimes it's a nurse, sometimes it's an obstetrician, sometimes it's a midwife. And I think it's really important that whoever is in that position of authority doesn't use that position to rob the expectant or laboring or postpartum mother of her authority, but uses, like, you can use your authority to empower and to give like this power and authority to the birthing mother. And you could do that with your words. And it's important the way that we talk to each other and like recognize that our experiences are each unique and individual and need to be validated. And validation is something that we can do with the words that we speak. And it helps people feel like they have more power and choice and value. I think it's really important. I'm going to ask one last question for you. If you had to describe your birth and postpartum experience in just one word, what would it be?
That's really hard. Just one word. Let's see. I had 4 words.
Tell me your 4 words. Oh, yeah.
Love, exhausting, defeating, disheartening. But that birth story taught me things over the past 18, 19 months that I feel empowered by it. And I'm very proud of my birth story and I'm grateful for it. So I'd say empowering,
Okay.
even though nothing went the way I had hoped.
I think that you make a really good point, though, because people sometimes talk about, like, people who are making birth plans or have strong preferences. People will say, oh, but you can never predict what's actually going to happen and it's all out of your control and whatever. But even so, I think that people that feel like they're able to be the one making choices and have done the work to educate themselves and frame the experience feel better about their stories, even if they go completely differently than what they'd planned for, if they've been given some opportunity to be the one making the choices.
Yeah, and I 100% believe that taking the birth classes, doing all these relaxation techniques, learning about birth and labor prepared me to make hard decisions when they came up, where it didn't totally destroy me. I mean, it was really hard and emotional, but turned out to be that I was making the right choices for me.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Lisa. It was great to have you. So, Lisa, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Yes, that'd be great. I have an email. I'm a doula, so I'll give you my doula email. It is mychoicebirth@gmail.com.
Great. Thank you. So thanks for sharing that. If anybody wants to connect with Lisa. And you serve primarily Salt Lake County, is that true? In Utah?
Yep, up to Lehigh, and I guess it depends on the client how far north. So
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Did words play an important role in your birth experience? If you're interested in sharing your story on the podcast, go to www.birthwords.com. If you're liking what you hear on the podcast, please leave a review on your podcast app. For more resources about harnessing the power of words to benefit the birth experience, visit birthwords.com.